When Silence Screams. Cha Eun-woo's secret visits to Moon Jae-young's old apartment. In the glamorous but relentless world of South Korean entertainment, love rarely exists in its pure form. It must be hidden, disguised, and guarded, not only from flashing cameras, but from the weight of public opinion. For Cha Eun-woo and Moon Jae-young, two of the most beloved stars in the industry, their relationship was never a loud declaration. It was a collection of quiet gestures, unspoken truths, and stolen moments in the shadows. The public saw them as co-stars with enviable chemistry, the perfect pairing on and off the screen. But behind the curtain, their romance had been marked by long absences, growing misunderstandings, and a painful parting that neither fully wanted yet both felt necessary. The world moved on. Headlines shifted to the next celebrity couple, the next drama, the next scandal. But Eun-woo's story didn't end when the relationship did. While fans speculated and tabloids guessed, he carried something heavier than rumors, a longing so fierce it found him standing alone outside the building where she once lived, night after night, when silence screamed louder than words. It had been months since their breakup, when Eun-woo first found himself walking through the familiar streets of Jae-young's old neighborhood. It was late, past midnight, and the air carried the faint scent of rain. His hood was pulled low, mask covering half his face, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He hadn't planned it. At least, that's what he told himself. But somehow his feet took him there, to the brick apartment building with the flickering streetlight out front. He stopped across the street, looking up at the darkened windows. He knew she had moved out weeks ago. Friends had told him. But that wasn't the point. The point was, this was where she had been, where they had once shared ramen at 2 a.m. after filming, where they'd watched movies on her tiny couch, her head on his shoulder, his hand absent-mindedly tracing patterns on her arm. That night, he stayed for only a few minutes before turning back. But the walk home felt heavier than the walk there. If the first visit had been accidental, the second wasn't, nor was the third. Sometimes he came after long days at work, his mind too cluttered to sleep. Sometimes he came after celebratory events, smiles and cameras and polite laughter, when the absence of her presence became unbearable in the quiet afterward. He never entered the building. He never knocked on the door that was no longer hers. He just stood there, sometimes leaning against a lamppost, sometimes sitting on the bench across the street. He would watch the building, as if waiting for a ghost to appear at the window. It wasn't about hope that she would suddenly return. It was about holding on to the fragments of a time when she was still his. The apartment had been small by celebrity standards. A cozy one-bedroom with sunlight spilling in during the afternoons, the walls decorated with postcards from her travels. Eun-woo remembered every detail. He remembered the way she kept her shoes lined neatly by the door, except for the pair of worn sneakers she kicked off haphazardly whenever she was tired. He remembered the faint vanilla scent that always lingered in the air. He remembered the squeaky hinge on the bathroom door and the tiny balcony where she kept potted plants she often forgot to water. And he remembered the nights, so many of them, where they'd sat on the floor eating takeout straight from the containers, the television playing something neither of them was really watching. Those walls had seen laughter, arguments, reconciliations, and moments so tender they hurt to recall. After a while, some of the neighbors began to recognize him, even under the hood and mask. They didn't approach, whether out of respect or disbelief, he didn't know. But there were murmurs. An old woman who lived on the first floor once left a cup of coffee on the bench he often sat on, nodding at him knowingly before shuffling back inside. "You're here for someone who's not here anymore, aren't you?" she had said the first time. Eun-woo had only smiled faintly and bowed in thanks. He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. In many ways, the apartment was a mirror for his own state of mind. Still standing, but no longer inhabited by the warmth it once held. He knew Jae-young had moved to a different part of the city, closer to her new filming location. He knew she was doing well. Her recent interview spoke of new projects, new challenges, new beginnings. But for Eun-woo, beginnings were impossible when the ending still lingered like a stubborn shadow. Visiting that old apartment was his way of keeping her close without intruding into her new life. There was one night in particular that stayed with him. It was raining heavily, the streets slick with reflections of neon signs. He sat on the bench across from the building, The rain tapping against his umbrella, the cool air stinging his cheeks. Through the curtainless window of a second-floor unit, he could see a young couple laughing over something on a phone. The sight twisted something inside him, not out of jealousy, but out of the aching reminder of what he had lost. He closed his eyes and let the sound of the rain drown out his thoughts. He stayed longer than usual that night, until the streetlight finally went out and darkness swallowed the building whole. In his mind, he often spoke to her during those visits. Words he never had the courage to say when they were together came easily now in the silence. "I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for us. I still remember the way you laughed when you burned the toast that morning. Do you think about me at all?" The building never answered, of course. But in a way, that was a comfort. Silence couldn't reject him. It wasn't until months later that G.A. Young heard about his visits, through a mutual friend who lived in the area. They were meeting for lunch when the friend casually mentioned, "You know, I've seen Unwoo hanging around your old place a lot. Thought maybe you two were back together." G.A. Young froze, her chopsticks hovering midair. "My old apartment?" "Yeah, always at night. Just standing there, sometimes sitting on a bench." That night, she lay awake in her new apartment, the city light spilling through the blinds. She thought about all the times she had walked away from that old place without looking back. And now, the image of him standing there, silent, alone, wouldn't leave her mind. Weeks later, fate, or maybe something deeper, brought them back to that street. She had been in the neighborhood visiting a friend when she decided, almost without thinking, to walk past her old building. It was late, and there he was. He didn't notice her at first, his gaze fixed on the familiar brick walls. When she finally spoke his name, it was almost a whisper. "Unwoo." He turned, his eyes widening slightly. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he gave a small, almost shy smile. "I didn't think you'd ever come back here." "I didn't think you would either," she replied softly. They stood there in the quiet, the city noise a distant hum. No cameras, no scripts, no audience, just two people in a place where they had once been everything to each other. That night didn't end with dramatic declarations or promises of reconciliation. They talked, really talked, for the first time in a long while, about their work, their families, the things they had missed in each other's lives. The first night he went back to her old street was supposed to be just a late walk. That's what Unwoo told himself as he left his car parked 2 blocks away and shoved his hands into his coat pockets. The December air was sharp enough to sting his skin, but he welcomed it. He needed something to cut to the fog in his mind. He didn't take the usual streets home from his studio practice that night. His feet moved on instinct down narrow alleys and quiet roads he hadn't walked in months. By the time he realized where he was, the familiar outline of her apartment building was just ahead, lit by the same flickering street lamp that had been there the first time he'd ever visited her. He stopped across the street, watching the darkened windows. Her unit had been on the 3rd floor, left corner, the one with the tiny balcony where she used to keep a row of potted succulents. They'd probably been replaced by now, or maybe abandoned entirely, but in his mind he still saw her there on lazy Sunday mornings, hair tied messily, sipping coffee and waving to him when he arrived. A gust of wind rustled the dead leaves along the sidewalk. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. The street was otherwise silent, save for the low hum of a vending machine outside the convenience store nearby. Unwoo exhaled slowly, his breath forming a pale cloud in the cold air. He had no reason to be there, no appointment, no phone call, no message to send. And yet, leaving felt impossible. He crossed the street, his sneakers crunching over scattered gravel, and lowered himself onto the wooden bench near the building's entrance. The bench was old, paint peeling one side slightly slanted. They had sat there together once after a late-night convenience store run, splitting a cup of instant noodles because she claimed it tasted better when shared. He could still remember her laughter when the noodles slipped from his chopsticks, splattering broth onto his jacket. "That's what you get for being overconfident," she teased, offering him her own half of the noodles like a peace offering. Now the bench was empty. The air was still, but if he closed his eyes, he could almost hear her voice again. A week later, he came back. This time it wasn't an accident. The day had been long, back-to-back filming, an endorsement shoot, and an endless stream of polite smiles for cameras. By the time the last event wrapped, the noise of the world had settled like a heavy weight on his chest. He drove without thinking, turning into the same narrow street. His hood was up, mask in place. The city lights dimmer here than in the heart of Seoul. The building stood just as he'd left it. Quiet, unassuming, and unchanged by everything that had happened between them. This time, he didn't just sit. He walked slowly along the perimeter of the building, tracing the path they used to take when they returned from late-night walks. He paused at a convenience store where she always picked up a chocolate milk for herself and a vitamin drink for him. The clerk inside was new, but the bell over the door still chimed the same way. He bought nothing, just stepped back out into the night, the sound of the bell echoing in his ears long after it stopped. An unplanned memory trigger. On his third visit, the sky was threatening rain. The air felt heavy, charged. He'd planned to stay only a few minutes. But as he approached the building, the first drops began to fall. He ducked under the small awning near the entrance, the same spot where they had once stood laughing in the middle of a sudden summer downpour, dripping wet but refusing to run inside. Back then, she had looked at him with sparkling eyes and said, "Rain isn't so bad when you're with someone who doesn't mind getting wet." The memory hit him like a punch. Now, the rain felt colder. He pulled his hood tighter, the sound of it pattering against the plastic awning masking the quiet ache in his chest. It wasn't until his fourth visit that someone acknowledged him. An elderly woman from the first floor stepped out to throw away a bag of recyclables. She paused, eyeing him for a moment before her gaze softened in recognition. "You used to visit the girl who lived here," she said matter-of-factly. Eun-woo hesitated, unsure if denial would sound more suspicious than honesty. Finally, he simply nodded. The woman set down her bag and shuffled closer. She was nice. Always greeted me when she came home. You stood by her like you were guarding something important. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he offered a polite bow. She gave a faint smile and, before disappearing back inside, added, "If you're here to remember, then remember well. That's all we can do when someone's gone." Every visit after that felt like a conversation with the building itself. He would stand across the street, eyes fixed on the balcony, and let the memories play like silent films in his head. Her leaning over the railing to call down to him when he arrived. The sound of her key turning in the lock as she opened the door with a tired smile. The way her laughter filled the cramped living room until it felt bigger than it was. The walls might have been painted over, the furniture replaced, but the space still carried echoes of them, if only in his mind. One night, he arrived later than usual. The streets were quieter, the wind sharper. As he approached the building, he noticed a light on in what used to be her unit. For a split second, his heart leapt, irrational hope flaring before he could stop it. But when a man stepped out on the balcony to smoke, the illusion shattered. Eun-woo turned away quickly, the image of a stranger occupying a place that had once been theirs burning in his mind. That night, he didn't sit on the bench. He walked straight back to his car and drove aimlessly until the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. The ritual takes hold. By the sixth visit, it had become a ritual. Finish work. Drive to the street. Sit on the bench for exactly 20 minutes. Let the silence speak louder than anything he could say.